Hey, hey, this is Ankita,
And this is Nalini.
and you are tuned in to Prickly Pears, the podcast where we celebrate uninhibited women with prickly points of view. This is season 3. It's been a while. This season's called Spouse It Up, and we are here for the big wrap up. Nalini, what are we covering?
I can't believe that it's been so long that we've been recording the season, but as they say, life comes in the way. I'm so glad to be recording today. Going back to the question that we started this season with, what does spouse mean in today's day and age? And does it hold it hundreds of years of definition of being a person of the opposite gender that you spend your life with and have kids with and their families, yours, yada yada? Or is it something new and different today? Or is it happening in the world where people are going into life partnerships without preconceived notions or being broken down or stopped by old heteronormative stereotypes? That's what we were looking for. And we found a great set of examples and stories ranging from someone who lives with their friend and consider their best friend as their life partner, to actual hetero couples like Nam and Harsh, even Aditi's story in an arranged marriage, how she found the life partner that she lives a very happy and successful life with, to Malvika, who, without even looking that deeply, she found the love of her life in the midst of a lot of chaos in Singapore, and that happened to be a woman, and she is in a lifelong romantic partnership with that person. So of course, you can all go and check out all of those individual episodes and more. And we heard some Gen Z and millennial perspectives. Ankita, what am I missing?
I think you've covered most of our episodes, especially even Natasha and Bob, who've been in a relationship for God knows how long and have no intention of doing the 7 rounds around the fire. But I think my big takeaway from all of the conversations we've had is to take heart. I loved what our Gen Z and millennial conversation said. Like, look, if you haven't figured out the partnership, that's okay. Like, you'll find your way, and that there isn't just one kind, there are many, many kinds of it. If there's one thing I would take away, it's hope. Relationships are messy, like every single conversation we've had a fair bit of messiness in them. But the fact is, like, hey, it will work out. I don't know if you had one thing that really stood out for you through all the conversations.
I went in with such a biased perspective, so I don't know what I will say is probably biased. Is that life partners don't come in a sherwani and a pagri anymore, or a black suit or whatever they wear in other religions. But that was my takeaway, and that's how we started. And I think that's definitely, it sounds very, but it doesn't sound right coming from someone who is actually married and living with the guy who came in a pagri and a sherwani. But that's it, right? Like, whatever your life is, like, you can always, and the world around you is changing, we better understand it, adapt to it, be the pioneers of hope that this world needs, because if prickly women don't do it, I don't know who else will. Also, I think one more message from the whole season was people can be happy by themselves, like self love and all that. But also with Aboli's story of, she had the big love of her life, she lost it, but she is extremely happy and comfortable by living with herself. Jeshri, who's a Gen Z person who says, like, I will never marry in life. Let's see how that goes. But that's what she thinks her ideal life is, like, by herself. And there's so many people that we talked outside of these episodes as well in real life in all these months. And there are women who are living with their adopted child, or they lost their spouse but they had a child, and that's their life partner. They are living with their parents and single throughout their life, and that's their life partner. So it's time that we break that nuance. So I went in with that assumption, and I might have just found sample bias there and found all the people that are breaking those norms. But Ankita, you were talking to me about this Vogue study before we started recording. What was that?
Wait, before I get into the study, one of the big things I was thinking about before joining this call is if you would turn up in a sherwani and a pagdi. And I was like fretting over it that you'd send me back to change my outfit. But I'm glad we didn't do that this time. The study that you were referring to, so there were two. One, of course, is a very viral piece of news where Vogue came out with this article that it's embarrassing to have a boyfriend now. And obviously that makes you reflect on like what's happening in the culture outside that's led to a large publication putting out an article like that, right? And obviously, there is a debate on how much of it is real or whether it was a satire. But there was also a New York Times article which said that the young men of today are in crisis. Their suicide rate is higher than women. The quality of jobs is lower than the jobs women have. The education levels, if you were to look around the world, for women is rising at a much faster rate, and men are declining. They took for granted that they would be in a relationship that women would like accept. It's getting harder for them to find a partner in the opposite sex. And the article asks, like, where did the young men go wrong? And I do think like all of this is very reflective of the fact that like I have met so many single women, and it's not like they're not looking for a partner. They are looking for men out there. It's just that the dynamics and what we don't need a partner anymore. We want a partner, and that changes what we're looking for, gives us the ability to say no if that's not what we're looking for. And I think all of these shifting dynamics makes it very relevant for our seasonal topic, right? To say like, hey, what are women looking for, and what is the gap out there in the market? And then there is a clear gap. And then if you obviously can't fill that gap by men, we then maybe look elsewhere and in different types, in communities and parents and children and so on.
Yeah, and it comes down to personal choice, right? There are people out there who just absolutely don't want a relationship with men, and that's totally fine too.
Yeah.
It also, we try to find men with good pod worthy or prickly pears worthy opinions on this topic. Listeners, it's not that we didn't, we wanted to have an equal platform for men in one of our episodes where we get single men to share what do they think it's missing. And I had, and Ankita, like we've spoken to so many single men on this topic across this year that we've been shooting, and none of it was good enough to put on the pod, to be honest. Like, again, maybe coming from a place of bias that we don't understand where they come from, where they're coming from. But
Probably our networks are not strong
I
enough.
mean,
If we knew enough single men who were pod worthy.
but that's why I started doing this at an Indian and American wedding, right? In Bali. What more diversity would you need? Like, people from so many countries living all over the world, and many of them single men, were at the wedding. And I went around asking that question to fill time between functions, and still nothing. I mean, they think that they don't want to get married, yeah, but like why, or the depth that we're looking for in terms of, or the depth that our single women provided, it's not the same. I think we just, as women, we are just overly like emotionally more mature than men, and that is one of the many gaps in that study. Another one, like parenting, I think, obviously we should do a whole different season eventually on parenting, but they say, right, that we made our women feminist, but we forgot to teach our men how to be with feminist women or independent women. And anyway, as you can see here, if you're watching video, I am the chief frameworks officer for the day. So as every other season wrap up, with the help of AI this time, I have come up with what we learned in our season by talking to all the different people on and off camera. And we came up with a framework to find a life partner, which is not, maybe we are the first people in the world, Ankita, to come up with a framework to find a life partner that is not your spouse, or that is not your wedded partner or your hetero partner, or your, like, it can be anybody.
Well, I know I'm the chief active listener, but I'm interrupting you here. Jeff Bezos does have a regret minimization framework, and he used that to find his first wife and a lot of other life decisions. So I don't think we are the only ones to created a framework for all kinds of partnerships. But yeah, I think the regret, like, we can talk about that framework if appropriate. But I really want to get to know more about this framework that you're talking about.
Okay, the five pillars framework. So let's start there, and we will hopefully we can bring in examples from what we heard from our guests, and also my life, your life. So five pillar framework of finding a life partner for independent women. Why independent is very critical. I obviously went around trying to fish out a framework for smart women, successful women, Indian women, like whatever you say. But like independence, I think, is that core thing that differentiates us, women like you and me, and our network and prickly peers that listen to us on a regular basis, from all the other type of men. Like whatever your skin color and all of that, like, doesn't really matter. Independent women are their own breed, and that's why this framework is from the perspective of independent women. Starting with, just like our purpose framework, everything starts with yourself, knowing yourself better, or as I call it, the self audit. What are you looking for in a person that you want to spend the rest of your life with? What are your core values that you will kill for, or kill to keep in your life? Or if you remove the violence, what are those core values that you live by and you want everyone else to live by? And core values, things that are non-negotiable for you and people around you. It can be your friends, your family, or whoever. So that self audit is the key.
Do you want to talk about your core
The
values?
core values, when I was looking for a life partner, and I was very clear, I wanted a man, and a man who is taller than me. Sounding very vain, that wasn't part of my core values. That was just, I don't know why, because of the all the years of just being around tall men in the army. I would like to say, like, that's probably the reason. But I knew that I wanted a man taller than me, as intelligent as me. And everyone used to be like, intelligence, like that's also very shallow and that's also very vain. But my core values, my basic assumption was that if someone is not as intelligent as me, or does not have the same IQ plus EQ, is what I call intelligence, but if the other person does not have the same IQ plus EQ or higher than me, then I'm going to have to spend half my time in my life, or half my life if it's a life partner, explaining myself to them. So, like, intelligence was definitely something that I wanted to look for. But going back to core values, it was definitely honesty. Honesty is just something that in the army circles or whatever, like the lives that we have led, if honesty and loyalty are the kind of things that we have grown up with, and even if I move away from the forces, move away from India, do whatever, I never wanted to let that go. So honesty, open communication, transparency, like, these are just core values for me, and I wanted someone that would go by them. But what I think I will cover that in the next step of the framework, of how I went about looking for someone that was complementary to these core values. So maybe, since I said the word complementary, we can move to the next step.
Yeah.
The next step is finding a complementary partner, where the goal is to find a person whose strength supports yours, rather than them feeling threatened by it or uncomfortable with it. And what that means is that when I looked at, like, the things that are important to me, whether it's intelligence or honesty or all of that, I realized that at some level I was, because I always think of myself as a founder, wannabe founder, someday a founder. I used to think that, like, okay, I have all of these values, but I also have, my strengths are communication, my strengths are business related, like all the EQ and IQ that goes with business and growing a business and all that, and an MBA. So I wanted someone who is, and I was always very weak with numbers. I was good at math, but I was weak at doing all the mental math that, many very brainy children in India do. I never could do it. So at some level, like, I knew that to complete my life in a very meaningful way, I wanted someone that was very good at numbers, or good at the, like, the quant side of things overall. If they could be a good co-founder for me, yes, but in a life partnership, you always need, your finances, your, like, everything is centered around numbers. And that's why and we'll get into the 37% rule eventually. But like, all the people that I would date, I would realize that if they are not good at math, like, it's such a big turn off for me. And if, especially if they're worse than me in on math, like, even when I was dating this fighter pilot from the Indian Air Force, like a super good looking hot fighter pilot, but the guy couldn't do numbers at all, and a bunch of other things that were not wrong with him. He was a great guy, just that it was, there were the few things that were like my independence. Like, my independence metric was something that I knew that because I'm an independent person, someone who would compliment me would be a person who appreciates my independence, and is not threatened by it. This particular person in the Indian Air Force was very career focused and driven and ambitious, and you would think that an independent person would like another such independent person. But in their minds, the person having their own corporate job and, like, gallivanting across the world was just not matching or complementary to their life of like growing up the ranks in the Indian Air Force, where you need your spouse to be an active part of your social life and your like unpaid job of a forces wife, right? So that we were very good individuals and independent, but like there was just no, it wasn't complementary. So when I say complementary, I also want to clarify that it's not same or different. Ankita, do you want to explain this better than I would?
Yeah, we were talking about this very briefly before we actually started recording, that complementary is not like you have a hole and you want someone to fill it, or that they're exactly a replica of you. It is about where the both the pieces somehow fit together, that the whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts.
Exactly. You say it so much better than I would. I'm just rambling at this point.
It is really interesting. Like when you talk about all of those things, it makes complete sense. So I'm going to come back to pillar one and pillar two very briefly and then let you take us to the percent rule because you mentioned it. But we do this thing called the values exercise. It's a very popular icebreaker for some reason at work where I am. And they give us a whole set of values. It's a huge sheet with about 100 values on it. And they say you can only pick two. If you could live only by two values, what would they be? And these values are our core values, and they're independent of whether it's our values when it comes to relationships or work or like how we live, right? And when I did the exercise, and every time you do it, obviously you reflect on it a little more. But one of my core values is stability and security. You and I have chatted about it. It's a part of how we've brought up and everything else. And go back on the decisions I've made in life, and I'm like, if what is the one thing that drives most of my decisions? Even when I experiment and I'm curious and everything, it's always at the framework of risk minimization to what I consider my core stability legs. And at the same thing, I bring over to a relationship. Everything else can work, but are you offering me some form of stability and security? That's what I is my core value. And then when you look for a complementary partner, if it's not complementary to that strength, then obviously that's not the right relationship. The other thing that really stood out for me when you were talking about complementary partner profiles is, and it makes very good sense to me, because if I was extremely ambitious, I don't think two very ambitious, ruthless people can get together in a relationship, right? Like one of them has to be willing to step back at times when the other person needs to race ahead. And obviously, this might vary from point of time to point of time, but like if someone is really ambitious, their career might take them different places. Someone has to get up and move. So I absolutely understand, like, hey, I'm going to be the career person, but I need someone who's probably not as passionate about their career and willing to step back. Otherwise, the amount of conflict it will create is huge. So, like, those are two things that came to mind as you were going through pillar one and two.
And now that you say it, I'm thinking of all our guests, and I'm not to point fingers, right? So, obviously, for everyone, it was important that everyone earns their own money. That overall, like in today's day and age, everyone, men or women, think that everyone should at least earn as much as to support their lifestyle. But then there'll always be the one person who's a little more ambitious in a different field. It could be different fields, similar fields. So like if you take Natasha and Bob, he was so comfortable with the fact that she earns more than him, and she's very career focused and ambitious, and he's a musician. And not to say musicians are not ambitious, but they like it's a seasonal thing and all that. Same with Malvika and Ranisha, where she moved halfway across the world to be Ranisha moved with Malvika to, and where she could focus on her ambition,
Yeah.
and Ranisha would just support the both of them in like the fun element of life. So that's so true, and obviously it goes even for my relationship at this point. And I was watching the series Diplomat. I don't know if you guys haven't watched it, like I would really recommend it, because that's where the ambassador and vice president and president, like obviously those jobs are the same as, as I was saying, the air force and army, like you need the spouse to play such an important part. What if your spouse is equally ambitious about what they do? How's that ever going to work?
It's also when you're talking about your analytical point of view and your business point of view, I was like, yeah, like I am extremely analytical. I probably would like to partner with someone who is more emotionally driven versus analytical, because it helps me see a different perspective and I value that perspective, and I'm very cognizant that I'm not an expert in that space. So, okay, Nalini, you mentioned the 37% rule, and then we haven't touched upon it. What is it?
Yeah, so the 37% rule is, first I will say the step 3 or the pillar 3 of the framework, and then the 37% rule.
Okay.
This third pillar of the framework is searching and vetting. Sounds very normal, but if you go out in the world with your own values and you know what kind of partner you're looking for, because you know the complementary stuff that you're looking for, how and where do you search, and how long do you search, and when do you stop? So that is the third step, and that's where the amazing 37% rule, it has, like, many people won't like it, but for my wannabe mathematician and quant brain, I am not good at it, but I always want to be. So for me, even before I met Sherry, I read this, and you and I have both read this book, Ankita, Algorithms to Live By. The first chapter of that book is the 37% rule. What it means is that if you're looking for a candidate for life partnership, for interview, for like a job or anything, if you're looking for a person to fill a role, if you have a certain set of candidates already, like, okay, there is these 20 people that are my neighbor boys, I need to marry one of them. If you know your n, if you know the number of candidates in the pool, then the framework says that you need to go up to 37% of them, of 37% of those people, non committally, whether it is through dating, whether it's through sleeping with them, whether whatever it is, like, you go through 37% of your options without any commitment, to know what is important to you, to have some benchmarks for yourself which you didn't before going into the search. That n can also be the number of years that you're going to look for. Let's say I give myself from the age of 20 to the age of 30 to look for a life partner. I will go to 37% of those 10 years, which is 3.7 years as soon as I start, which is when I'm 24 years old, let's say. Like, if I give myself that time, so I'm 24 years old, and I have gone through that time dating different people non committally, but I have my benchmarks. As soon as I hit that time frame or that age or that number of candidates, the next person that I date that is better than the 37% options that I have seen, I just choose them. And that gives you a 37% probability of that being a success. So, when 37% might feel like very low probability of, if you find a life partner and then there's only 37% chance that you would end up being together for life, that is actually statistically proven to be the highest probability. If you were looking for, let's say, 10% of the time or 80% of the time, the person you find and eventually marry or live with would be lower probability of, like, sustaining it through life.
There, of course, each framework breaks down when there are too many variables. There are variables of whether the other person you pick chooses you back or not, or whether they're their own 37% timeline. And then obviously relationships are inherently messy, if that's one thing we've learned. So while this framework is great when you're finding yourself a secretary, which was the original thing, it was a secretary problem, or like hiring someone, or you're looking for an apartment or something like that, but like, take it with a pinch of salt. It's a great rule, I would stand by it, but be aware, like, it may not always work for everyone.
And I think the thing to take away from all of this, if you remove the numbers, is that go for a certain period of time non committally. Again, some Indian grandmother somewhere will hate me for saying this, right? But go date people, meet people. No need to destroy your virginity if you don't want, but like, go date people and assess your pool non committally for a certain period of time, whether you're in an arranged marriage situation or whether you're in a, as open as, like, you're living by yourself and you have all the luxury of dating apps or whatever. Just go for a certain period non committally till you realize, like, what are your benchmarks, and then after that, you know what your benchmarks are, and then you probably just get better at figuring what you like and who you like more. And of course, it should be consensual.
Tell us what happens after you've found this person.
Oh, well, so one quick thing that we will cover here is where you find this person, right? So if you just go in your, as I was saying, like, neighborhood, just like trying to date everyone around you, like, if you are a strong, independent woman, that might not work for you, because we are not blessed with strong, independent people like in usual neighborhoods. Like, you need to go, and that's why maybe workplace romances are successful, sometimes disastrous, but usually very successful. Like in business school, relationships are successful because you need to go where those kind of complementary skill set people are available in plenty. So the framework says that don't go looking for a person at a venue where they are there out of a habit. I love to drink, you love to drink, so we're at a bar and we start catching up. That's not going to get you the right pool. Like if you're looking for someone intellectually stimulating, you need to go to places where the intellectually stimulating people go, like maybe Kilconomics. We went to the economics festival last weekend. You didn't chat up many strangers there, Ankita, but if you were to, maybe you'd find someone there. So yeah, that's where you go looking is also equally important as who you're looking for and when do you stop looking. So these are the core three pillars of finding a person. But of course, once you have done all this and 37% and you start dating someone, right? Or you're like engaged with them, how do you assess the partnership dynamic where you're when you're in there? These last two pillars I don't like 100% agree with, so I will flip through them very quickly. Like assessing your relationship obviously means that you don't lose your individual identity when you're in a relationship, and that's what our couples also told us when we talked to them, and Nam and Harsh, or whether it's me and Sherry. Like we have a very clear we versus me situation going everywhere. Like you do you, I do me, and then there is a we. So there are three entities in a relationship. It's a you, me, and we, as long as we can clearly differentiate between them, there is no guilt associated with people being themselves and following their passions and all of that individually. I think we're good. But yeah, both partners need to spend time on their individual passions and social circles without any guilt or obligation. The fifth and final pillar is a maintenance mode. Like how do you maintain? You found the person, you got into a relationship with them, and they are your life partner for now. How do you continue to maintain this rigor through the relationship? And by rigor I don't mean sexual rigor. I actually think that American shows always show that people have the best sex like for 50 years if they are married for 50 years, but I don't think that's real, but that's just me.
That's a question we should have asked our 10-year relationship folks.
Yeah, like is the but then do you think they will be honest?
I actually think people are very open on this topic at the start of a relationship, and then towards the end, it just becomes a non conversation, which is probably also a sign.
Yeah, and depends what your values are. If your values are that sex is a part of it but it's not that important, and both of you align on it, good for you. So fifth is how do you maintain it, right? Like, and being from the business world, like I'm just going to suggest a quarterly review, quarterly or like a 6 monthly review, just assessing all the values and all the things that you decided together were important to you. Like you just assess them and see if you're on track. If not, have an honest conversation about it. Which brings me to why I think that my relationship works for now. But Ankita, stop being an active listener now. And like, do you?
Nalini, we went around asking our couples on the show a whole bunch of questions, and obviously, we missed out asking you a few of them. And I know you're going to answer them openly and honestly because that's your core value. So, the first question, and I think you have a framework for this too, is are there conflicts in your relationship? If yes, how often? If no, why not? Like, how is that possible? But then, if you do have conflicts, what is a conflict resolution style that you follow?
We don't have conflicts. Like that's just I have it's been 5 years since we're married and like 6.5 since we're in a relationship. It's we just don't fight, and also because of I think Sherry's personality, and him, and people listening to this who don't know him, like he's just non-confrontational as a person. Like unless it is something totally against his core values, which is where when he would confront in a very like the most non-confrontational confrontation you can imagine is how he would do it. But he doesn't believe in fighting. And I dated a lot of people, as I keep harping on about, and every single relationship I used to have mad crazy fights. And I almost, to a point that I started believing that that's how my life is going to be. Like, if I marry someone, this is a part and parcel of it, like throwing things at each other, like violent exits from the home, and just saying like you will never see someone again. That was just my life, like that each and it's, and I used to think like, how can it be so common, right? Like, it's all of these people and me, I'm the common person and I'm the crazy bitch here. But now let's see how the future, what the future holds for us. We don't have children and all that. People say that your life changes and your partnership changes when you have that. But for now, like, we don't fight, and so we don't have a conflict resolution. Like, I wish I had something to share, but if Sherry's unhappy, he just becomes quiet, like quiet for some time, and then he's okay, and then I have to push him to talk about it, and then we talk about it. But that's like really the kind of conflict we have. When I'm unhappy, I just share with him. But I have a three prong three prong reason of why I think we don't fight, and why we just go through life smoothly without like the crazy sinusoidal things that people say that you need to be in a happy relationship. Like, couples need to fight to be in a happy relationship, but we don't, well, for now. So the three things that I think, people say the ABCs of relationship, like, but I have a BCD instead of an ABC of my relationship. That, because you ask me this question very often, Ankita, right? Like, what, like, how can you not fight? The few things that we agreed on early on in our relationship, the B of this thing being boundaries. That we were, because we met slightly later in life compared to many other people who fall in love in their 20s and they just know that this is the one. We were very deliberate about our search and all that, even though it wasn't this framework, but we had things in our mind that we were looking for and what was important to us. So boundaries were always very important, because if you're an independent person, you want to do a, you want to maintain your identity and your everything, and it shouldn't, like, I was very clear, I don't want to merge with someone, never like change my name, have different bank accounts and things like that. Like, we always knew that there's going to be boundaries in our relationship. Like, we won't be the conventional married couple, like, who just have joint accounts and like all of those things. So we, those were boundaries.
So wait, there are no joint
No,
accounts?
we have no joint, we don't even have a
Okay.
single joint account in the three countries that we hold accounts in. Because like all
Don't worry, we'll
yeah.
come to finances
Okay,
after
fine.
you've finished your
So my
framework.
boundaries were the first thing. C, my BCD, C of BCD is communication. Brutally honest, because that's my value. So brutally honest and open communication, and that's something that wasn't Sherry's comfortable place to be. He wants to, and the way he was brought up, right? It all comes down to that. Like, most families in India don't have brutally honest conversations with each other. I was brought up differently. We would talk about everything. So for me, even if my parents were fighting or whatever, like, I don't claim that they had the best marriage, but like but there was brutally honest communication always, and that's something that was core to me. He changed himself over time for this context. Like, he knows that this is a non-negotiable for me. I said that on a very drunk day in Bali, while we were day drinking all day in the beginning of our relationship at a beach club. We had this very deep, meaningful conversation after a bottle of wine, that I told him that I don't think you communicate enough. And like, if we are going to be together, you need to start talking and sharing. And then I asked him the weirdest questions about his like sex life and how many people he had been with. And I said, you can ask me these questions too now. And then he said, like, no, that's not my value, I don't want to ask you those questions. So we never even talked about all my exes and the typical things that people want to know about each other. It is my value, so I want to know all that about him, but he doesn't. And that's just, he can live happily like that. So yeah, brutally honest, open communication at my demand. I think, like, maybe that, because he would not, he just doesn't, he can go through life without knowing things. That's just him. Like, I can't. So we need to have conversations about things. That was the brutally open, honest communication, which was C. D, D of BCD is decision making independence. And that's where I come back to our we versus me thing. Like, because we are independent individuals who met late in life, who have different bank accounts, we earn money separately. At the time, we even lived in different countries, so it was even more like more different and independent. We decided that like we will make decisions for our lives, each other, like our my life and his life, by ourselves. We will ask opinions of the other person if needed, whatever, like workout, eating, or different kind of things. I would, if I need his opinion, I will ask. If not, I will decide things about my life. And same for him. I might have opinions about the 10 hours that he spends of his free time on astrology every week, but that's my opinion and I cannot enforce it on him. If we didn't have this clear distinction of decisions, we would have fought. I think that's why we don't fight, because it's very clear accountability. That's your life, that's my life. But of course, if we want to jointly find a house, if we want to put our pool of money together to buy a house that we will live in, of course that is a we decision and both of us need to weigh equally on it. So that's the DM me for more more such tips, but that's my BCD of why we don't fight.
Okay, I think we've got three useful frameworks, and if we throw the regret minimization, then we've got four frameworks. We have the five pillars, we have your 37% rule, we have BCD. So our prickly pears may not get all the answers of life and relationship from this podcast, but they definitely have enough frameworks that can they can play around with. I am going to get us out of here because we've been talking about frameworks for a bit. But before we get out, Nalini, we may not get to the topic of relationships for a while again. Is there anything you absolutely want to share that stood out for you from this season? Or a takeaway for our listeners?
Takeaway. Yeah, I'm going to just forcefully shove down a takeaway to into people's throats again, which is life partners come in many shapes and forms. It's not who we grew up thinking we will end up with, as we say, right? Who we end up with. I hope this season and all the amazing conversations and our guests change at least one person's perspective on what their knight in shining armor or the life partner that we have dreamt of may look like. And it can be anybody.
I think my message out there would be just saying, hey, relationships are inherently messy. These are questions which people have written about for ages, tried to figure out for ages. I don't think anyone has the answer. So, no matter what stage you are at, whether you don't want anyone or you want someone and not finding the person, or you're in a relationship you want to get out of, wherever in life you are, you'll get out just fine. I think that that's the message I've heard from like all the conversations, and I think that makes me very hopeful. On that note, I'm going to get us out of here. On behalf of Ankita and Nalini, we are out.